The year is 1970, and despite massive airstrikes and the deployment of ever more US troops, the war in Vietnam is going badly. Protesters fill the streets of US cities. At Kent State University in Ohio, protesting students are shot down by the National Guard. In California, following the killing of actress Sharon Tate and 3 friends, hippie cult leader Charles Manson is arrested. Violence is in the air on Visitors' Day at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, the headquarters of the crack Special Forces Regiment, the Green Berets. Early in the morning of the 7th of February 1970, the military police hurried to the house of Captain Jeffrey MacDonald, a Green Beret doctor. His faint, desperate voice on the phone had summoned them urgently to 544 Castle Drive. Help, stabbing, hurry, he had hardly more than whispered. They were met with a terrible sight of carnage. Captain MacDonald lay collapsed in the main bedroom beside the body of his wife, Colette, battered and covered with blood. The word pig was daubed over her bed. In another bedroom, his 5-year-old daughter, Kimberly, was also dead, with multiple stab wounds, her skull shattered by 2 heavy blows. In a third room, 2-year-old Kristen, stabbed 20 times with a knife, 15 times with an ice pick. Of the whole family, only Jeffrey MacDonald survived, with wounds to his head and chest. Taken to Fort Bragg's military hospital, it was found that apart from a stab wound in the chest, which had partially collapsed his right lung, the blow on his head was superficial, as were the other marks on his chest. He told of waking up to find that 4 hippies had broken into the house. There were 3 men and a blonde woman in a floppy hat, holding a candle and chanting the words, "Kill the pigs." He had struggled with them in the living room, but they tied his hands, hit him on the head, and he had passed out. He awoke to find them gone, his family dead around him. The Criminal Investigation Division of the Army issued a description of the gang, imitators of the Manson family, even down to scrawling the word pig in blood on the walls. Unused to dealing with break-in murders, the CID was later accused of sending in too many men and trampling on the evidence. One of the things which surprised investigators as they arrived was the lack of signs of violence in the living room where MacDonald had been sleeping on the couch when woken and attacked. Outside the back door they found a knife, an ice pick and a wooden club, all wiped clean of fingerprints. Jeffrey MacDonald said that he had never seen them before. Fort Bragg is an open base, so it was difficult to set up roadblocks. No sign was found of the intruders. For Jeffrey MacDonald's mother, like everyone at the funeral, the horror was intensified by the knowledge that Colette had been pregnant when she was battered, knifed, and killed. But as public sympathy went out to the handsome captain, Army investigators were worried by a series of unanswered questions. Unusually, all 4 members of the family had different blood groups, so the CID was able to check whose blood was where, and the story the blood told was different from his. Fibers from Captain MacDonald's pajamas provided further questions. When they searched the house, fibers were found around and even under the bodies, in places that didn't match MacDonald's account of events. On the 6th of April, 6 weeks after the tragedy, he was taken in for questioning. Asked to take a lie detector test, He first agreed, then refused. On the 1st of May, he was formally charged on 3 counts of murder by the army. Instead of a trial, the military held an official inquiry. MacDonald rejected an army lawyer. Instead, he chose to bring in a flamboyant and aggressive civilian attorney named Bernie Siegel. At the inquiry, held in a modest building on the base, Siegel immediately went on the attack, charging that the military investigators had been hopelessly inefficient. He claimed that 20 men had tramped all over the house, obliterating footprints and defacing fingerprints. No hair samples had been taken from the bodies, and evidence had been lost, including a pajama fiber found under Kimberly's nail. The army had failed to establish roadblocks, or to try sufficiently to track down the hippie gang. Siegel insisted that MacDonald had no motive to kill his wife, but as a drug counselor, he was a target for threats and revenge. As for the fibers, they may have come from his pajama pants, not his jacket. Where were the pants now? They had been thrown away by the hospital. Siegel said the proof that there really had been hippies was that 2 rings were missing from Colette's jewel box, which had bloodstains on it. He alleged that he could even identify one of them, the woman in the floppy hat. Her name, he said, was Helena Stokely, an 18-year-old drug addict who sometimes wore a floppy hat and a blonde wig. Stokely herself was too far gone on mescaline to remember what she had done that night. Throughout, Siegel made much of the background of the young officer who had come from a poor family to study at Princeton. Colette came from the same town, Pachoki, on Long Island. She had started going out with him during his 2nd year at Princeton. They married in 1963 when she was pregnant with Kimberly. After studying medicine at Northwestern University Medical School, he joined the army as a doctor in 1969, and they lived in a succession of army quarters. Suave and attractive, in and out of uniform, he dated several other women before and during the marriage. In October, the Army inquiry dismissed the charges against Captain MacDonald for lack of evidence, and he received an honorable discharge in December 1970. MacDonald moved away as quickly as he could, leaving the army house boarded up and the contents undisturbed. He moved to Long Beach in California, grew his hair early 70s style, and got a job pioneering emergency room medicine at St. Mary's Medical Center. He lived the good life, dated a succession of beautiful girls, moved into a seafront condominium, bought a 34-foot boat, and appeared on TV shows attacking the army. This did not endear him to Fort Bragg's Provost Marshal, Colonel Krivenek, or his superiors. So while MacDonald made speeches complaining of army incompetence, the file on the death of his family remained open. He became a local celebrity and basked in the applause of his peers. But a nemesis was shaping up in the form of his ex-stepfather-in-law, Alfred Kassab. Colette's mother had married Freddie Kassab when Colette was 13, and they were a close and loving family. At first, he had been a strong support to his accused step-son-in-law. Then he became disillusioned as he studied the Army inquiry.
I read this transcript through, innumerable times, maybe 20, 30 times. And the more I read it through, the more I realized that the story as he told it had to be a fabrication. It could not have happened the way he said it happened.
Kassab went to Fort Bragg to visit the site of the crime. He found an ally in the head of the Army's CID, Colonel Pruitt, who had assigned 8 agents to find the killer. The house was reopened, and following this investigation, the Army recommended a civilian prosecution of Jeffrey MacDonald. It took 2 more years before Kassab could convince the Justice Department to take matters further. Finally, 5 years after the tragedy, a grand jury in North Carolina indicted MacDonald, but he was able to go back to working at the hospital at Long Beach because the U.S. Court of Appeals found that his constitutional rights had been violated by the long delay. Only the U.S. Supreme Court could now order a trial for murder. Freddie Kassab was determined to get it to do so.
On the floor. None of his story holds together. I mean, none of what he says he did. He claims to have been attacked in the living room. He claims to have sustained 10 ice pick wounds across his abdomen. Now, those 10 ice pick wounds, nobody has ever seen. No doctor in the hospital ever saw them. I didn't see them. Mildred didn't see them.
Thanks partly to his obsessive urging, the Supreme Court agreed in June 1977 to accept the case for consideration. Bernie Siegel argued it was unfair.
Well, I think that the concluding line that I said to the court is the right one. That we're talking about the right to a speedy trial. It means that if the government delays bringing a case to trial inordinately, the delay's too long, and it hasn't got a reasonable justification, then the defendant's right is then denied by the long delay. To say to a defendant, well, even though they waited too long...
Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald was confident.
There is no way at this time that they could ever get a conviction.
But the Supreme Court disagreed, and in July 1979, 9 years after the killings, Jeffrey MacDonald stood trial in Raleigh, North Carolina. MacDonald's defense team, led by Bernie Siegel, took a fundamental decision to concentrate on convincing the jury that it was unthinkable that an upright, sane officer could have battered and knifed his pregnant wife and 2 little girls until they died in a welter of blood. They made little effort to refute the forensic evidence which had convinced the North Carolina grand jury to recommend a murder prosecution. In contrast, the state prosecutors were to concentrate on the forensic evidence, saying that if they could prove that MacDonald had done it, they didn't have to show why. As the trial opened, Judge Francis Dupree dealt the defense strategy several blows by refusing to allow them to produce psychiatric evidence of MacDonald's state of mind in 1970 or to quote from the original Army inquiry. Bernie Siegel protested bitterly at what he saw as unreasonable hampering of his client's case. Judge Dupree did, however, allow the prosecution to quote forensic evidence as to how MacDonald's pajama jacket, which he had admitted to placing over Colette's body, could be folded to show that the 48 holes in it matched the 21 ice pick wounds in her body. Using this evidence, plus the bloodstains and the fibers, the prosecution set out a completely different sequence of events. The MacDonalds started an argument, perhaps over his womanizing or the children's bedwetting. Then, as it escalated, he hit her and knocked her down in the main bedroom. Colette fought back, seizing a piece of wood to use as a club. Kimberly woke up, came into her parents' bedroom and tried to rescue her mother. Colette struck MacDonald with the club, but he then grabbed it, accidentally hitting Kim as he swung at her mother. He picked up the unconscious child and took her to her room. Now he decided to make it look like an outside attack and hit her again. The bloodstains showed that Colette must have run into baby Kristen's room to protect her. MacDonald followed her in and clubbed her, breaking both her arms and knocking her out. He carried her in a bedspread into their bedroom and finished her off with 16 thrusts of a knife. He then stabbed Kristen to death with 17 knife blows and attacked all 3 bodies with an ice pick before making a knife thrust in his own chest and ringing the military police. On the witness stand, MacDonald was unable to account for the forensic inconsistencies with his version. as here, many years later, he repeated a very different story.
I sat up and I saw strange people in the house. Not strange as portrayed in the movie Fatal Vision, strange because I didn't know them. They appeared clean-cut. I saw 3 males and a female, and I basically said something like, I don't know if I thought it or said it, but I remember feeling that I said, you know, who the hell are you? What are you people doing here? At the same time hearing Colette in the background saying, Jeff, help, why are they doing this to me? And those are the words I hear to this day. That's exactly what I recall. And it's very clear. There's no mistake about that. And as I said that and started to sit up, one of the males approached me and swung something at me and hit me in the head. And then everything is a blur, and there was a struggle, and I remember grabbing arms and a club and trying to strike back.
To back up MacDonald's story, the defense again produced Helena Stokely, who had testified at the original inquiry. A sad, drug-ravaged young woman, she was again unimpressive, testifying that she didn't know where she was at the time of the murders, and that she had not been wearing her blonde wig that night. She couldn't remember chanting "acid is groovy," as MacDonald had said the woman had. After the trial, she continually changed her story, sometimes confessing that she had been at the house, at other times denying it. But none of the men she named as her companions could be placed at the scene. The jury visited the locked house at 544 Castle Drive, Fort Bragg, where nothing had been touched since the MPs departed years before. There was food in the freezer, and toys still littered the floor. The living room seemed remarkably neat for the scene of a life-and-death struggle. Jeffrey MacDonald went back too, for the first time since leaving on a stretcher. Bernie Siegel had strongly opposed the jury's visit, but wanted his client there to show he felt no guilt or concern. Afterwards, both men expressed the view that the jury could not have got an accurate view of what the house had been like on the night of the crime.
I mean, it's just inconceivable. They have cleared out, you know.
Bernie, I think the point is that they represented to the court that this was a intact crime scene. It's intact about 5% of what was there that night.
As the trial drew to a close, Jim Blackburn, the prosecutor, encapsulated his case with the words, "Things do not lie, but people can and do." Siegel made a long and rambling closing, emphasizing his client's character. Once again, there was no attempt to refute the forensic evidence in detail. Yet as the case drew to a close, Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald remained confident.
And I'm innocent of the charges, and I hope they understand that.
The next day, the jury was expected to take a long time. But they were back after 6.5 hours. Several of them, including an ex-Green Beret officer, wept as they were asked their verdict. Guilty of the first-degree murder of Kristen. Guilty of the second-degree murder of Kimberly. Guilty of the second-degree murder of his wife, Colette. The sentence was the maximum, 3 consecutive life terms. Kristen's murder was voted as first degree because the jury saw it as calculated and cold-blooded. Their verdict showed that they believed he had killed his wife and elder daughter on the spur of the moment, blinded by anger during a quarrel with Colette. But once he had killed them, he had cold-bloodedly decided to do away with Kristen, to make it all look like a hippie gang killing. Judge Dupree refused to allow him to be released on bail pending an appeal, so he was escorted off to prison, still declaring his innocence. As MacDonald was driven away, his father-in-law, Freddie Kassab, whose single-mindedness had been instrumental in bringing Jeffrey MacDonald to trial, was delighted that he was denied bail.
I'm glad that the bail was revoked, because I think it's only just that since he has managed to keep this case out of court since the indictment in 1975, that it is only just that now that he has been convicted that he be incarcerated.
Prosecutor Jim Blackburn also defended the decision.
Were brutal murders. They were each clubbed or stabbed a number of times, with the exception of Kristen, who was stabbed in excess of 30 times. I think that the fact that he was sentenced to life sentences consecutively, the brutality of the murders, the length of time since those murders occur, it was justice that I argued as I did.
He then denied any malice.
Not at all. There's never been any vindictiveness on the part of the prosecution. It's been a pursuit of truth. It's been a pursuit of justice. That's what we told the jury. That's what I tell you today, and that's the truth.
Do you think what's your reaction?
Blackburn's assistant, Brian Murtaugh, who had been one of the first officials at the Department of Justice to become convinced that MacDonald must be prosecuted, summed up the feelings of many who had been involved in this extraordinary case.
That it's very hard to really, you don't feel happy. You can't feel happy at the crime. You can't help but feel sorry for MacDonald. That doesn't change the fact that the jury came back, some of them with tears in their eyes, and said he did it.
Also on the court steps, Bernie Siegel vowed to fight on.
With all my heart, with all the sincerity that I feel, I tell every one of you that Jeffrey MacDonald did not kill his family. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Wade Smith and I will file a notice of appeal that will take this case on its way to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit.
Within a year, the court agreed that Jeffrey MacDonald had been denied a speedy trial and released him from prison. So, in December 1981, all the major players were again gathered on the steps of the United States Supreme Court for an appeal by the prosecution that MacDonald be returned to prison. Both sides set out their pleas again.
I'm innocent of the charges and have always been innocent.
He was tried and a jury found him guilty.
On the 31st of March 1982, the Supreme Court finally ruled that Jeffrey MacDonald's constitutional rights had not been violated. And despite further appeals, this ruling has been consistently upheld.